scientists came in and did a detailed investigation directly over the fault zone, and that soil evaluation, so the fault goes right up to the B horizon. He found no disturbance in soil-related structures. And the soil is a very old soil. It's called a red yellow podzolic soil, and that only forms on old landscapes. And it takes a long time to develop. That soil was 6 to 10 feet thick, and it is at least 1 million years old. So that fault was determined not to be a seismic source. So, next slide. So, I conclude that the applicant's assessment for potential surface expression was appropriate, and it reveals no measurable surface deformation. When we looked at a suite of geologic maps and detailed topography from the LIDAR and specific field reconnaissance to determine those things, and that the surface deformation at North Anna is negligible. Fault A was previously found to be a geologically old structure, and the post-Mineral Virginia field reconnaissance and examination of high-resolution topographic maps also confirms that.
In the old days, we used to use the term capable or not. Here, you're just saying it's an old structure.
I don't like to use the word capable because, I mean, that is a very deterministic thing, and that definition has got some flaws in it. So when you're looking at, the younger it is, the more detail, the more I focus on it. So if it is older than Quaternary, because it's 2.6 million years old and it hasn't ruptured since then, that's a long time ago in terms of seismic hazard.
Yeah, I understand, but I guess my question would be, is the terminology one that is personal, reflecting what you just said, or is it something that we're now using generally?
It's still in Reg Guide 1.208.
What is?
It's the capable definition is still in Reg Guide 1.208.
Okay.
But in practice, what we do is we consider structures that are at the Quaternary, younger than Quaternary, are going to attract more attention, because if it happens at a very young age, recently, we figure that there's a reason for it, there's a structure for it.
Well, in the public debates that sometimes do take place, the idea of old and I pay more attention to more recent and so on, it doesn't sometimes always work. So when the Reg Guide comes in for updating, we'll probably have a debate about...
The standard review plan was revised, and we took that definition out of the standard review plan, and that happened to come up for renew recently. The Reg Guide is not being renewed right this minute, so we took it out of there and we put in the focus on the Quaternary and younger.
So does 1 million years old translate to something like 10 to the minus 6 exceedance frequency? Or?
Kind of. If it didn't move within the last 1 million years, it's 1 to 10 to the 6.
Maybe next year's the year, though.
So the 1 million years, was that the calibration point relative to the 2.5 million?
This is what the soil scientists determined 40 years ago about that B horizon, and sometimes you can't get a more precise date. That soil horizon is a feeling of that fault, whereas the chloride age and the fault gouge age at 238 and 214, that is within the action of the fault when it was ductile or brittle, and it's the maximum age, but it's not the minimum age, which is what we're interested in. So there's this big gap in time, and it's just what we had available to date.
If this had been 100,000 years ago, would you have been concerned?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm just trying to bracket where you're 2.5 million years. That's pretty long ago. I can relate to that. But where's the gray area, and then where you say, hold up your hands and say
it's a
stop.
graded approach. The younger it is and the closer it is, the more we pay attention to it. It's just a graded approach, because otherwise it's very deterministic. If we put, it has to be, because we can't always, like in this case, we can't determine exactly how old that fault is. And even if we get it today.
You know that's more than such and such, though.
Right. It's certain, because I went through and I read that soil scientist report, and he did X-ray diffraction, and he looked at,
You're getting far too detailed for an electrical engineer, okay?
well, he could find that fault in the saprolite going up to the B horizon, and the B horizon was a line that sealed the fault, and it wasn't deformed, so that means it has to be older than at least 1 million years. I can't give you a better date.
You're mushing all over the place. I'm just trying to get a calibration as to where you would have started wringing your hands, and I've got one.
Okay.
Even if it may change.
Yes, it will.
Okay.
Thank you.
My name is Vladimir Greiser. I'm a seismologist at NRO. Okay, thank you. Actually, Dominion, from my point of view, did a great job presenting their information on Section 252. I will try to avoid repetition as much as I can, but certain things should be repeated, unfortunately. Again, just to remind you, what was the difference? Why are we going back to this site, even it had ESP in 2006? And there are a number of events, there are a number of things which kind of require this re-review of seismic part. First of all, of course, is earthquake, Mineral Virginia earthquake of 2011. Second important step in seismology, in review of application, is publication of so-called Central and Eastern United States seismic source characterization, also called NUREC 2115. It happened in 2012, long after ESP. Another big step, again, was publication of the new ground motion models, which happened in 2013. And another issue which was very important is availability of the new site-specific geophysical information, which came to light around 2011, I believe, when they switched technology first time from ESBWR to USPWR, sorry for dyslexia. What happened, they drilled more holes, they did more investigation, and they found out that this subsurface structure is not as simple as it was considered during ESP process. Now, let's go step by step. Mineral Virginia earthquake. You already heard a lot about this. I will try to bring a little bit from the perspective of applied seismologist, if I may say. As it was mentioned before, it is located in the Central Virginia seismic zone. This zone was known. It's not the discovery that earthquake happened in this zone. It's a known zone of small to moderate seismicity. What happened during this earthquake, just to remind you, we had Dominion had seismic instrumentation at the Unit 1 of existing plant. And this unit, this instrumentation recorded at the two elevations. Of course, for us as seismologists, the most important is the closest to the lowest level at base mat. And I will talk about Central Eastern United States later. Now, Now, next slide, please.
Presumably it exceeded SSE for Unit 2 as well, but it's just you didn't have instruments there. There were only instruments on Unit 1, right?
It's a hard question, and if you wait a little bit, I may come to that. Thank you. Next slide, please. Yes, this one. This slide basically shows you the location of the North Anna Unit 3, and two circles not far away are epicenters of the main shock, determined by different groups. As you can see, we are not as precise as engineers, but according to seismological standards, it's pretty close. And basically, it's about 18 kilometers or 11 miles away from the North Anna site. Now, that's what next slide is. Yes. Okay. On the left, three panels demonstrate acceleration recorded at basemat location at the elevation of 216 feet. Now, just to remind you, the GMRS for Unit 3 is defined at the elevation of 224 feet. This means that it's pretty close, but it's still slightly different locations, and it is on base. Now, again, left panel, three components of recorded at basemat accelerations. Next three panels are velocity integrated through from acceleration, and the last on the right side, three panels are displacement. What can be said about this? Maximum acceleration was 26% G. Maximum velocity was about 14 centimeters per second, and maximum displacement was about 2.3 centimeters. Now, another important, just to finish the phrase, please, very important factor is that the duration of strong motion was pretty short, 2-3 seconds, which kind of explain why we didn't, North Anna didn't have any damage at Unit 1 and 2. Sorry, I'm ready.
Channel 3 is
okay, Channel 3 is actually north-south, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And as usual, we have two horizontal channels and one vertical. And usually vertical records lower ground motion, but more high frequency.
Which was the vertical, channel 2?
There is some kind of disagreement about this. We analyzed this record and we believe that channel 1 is vertical. Some people believe it's channel 2. I mean, I don't want to go into this, but when you look at the record, they are different horizontal and vertical channels. But it doesn't matter. Maximum acceleration was clearly at horizontal component north-south, and it was 26% G.
So if I would put a single degree of freedom oscillator on one of these, I could develop a response spectrum, couldn't I?
Of course we did it.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. And again, a very important part of this is that the record was, the duration of strong motion was pretty short, which is typical for magnitude 5.8.
How long?
2-3 seconds. But the total record was like 18 seconds, something like that.
Just for background, I was in San Jose. I lived in San Jose during the 1989 World Series earthquake, which was more like 30 seconds. That was an experience.
And I used to live in California before I moved here. I know what you mean. Yes, basically, large earthquakes, they produce longer duration of strong motion, and of course, they are much more damaging. Okay. Applicant, next slide, please. Yes. Applicant reevaluated PSHA using new Central Eastern United States seismic source characterization. And of course, just to remind you, ESP was done using old models, EPRI-SOC 86, 89. They are clearly superseded by the new model. Applicant, as they presented to you before, updated seismicity and recurrence rates to account for events for seismicity after the publication of 2012 new Act 215, and it's resulted in an increase of M maximum. They demonstrated this in their presentation. Applicant used the most recent ground motion models approved by NRC. And on the other side, of course, we did confirmatory analysis to make sure that our results agree with, in general, with the results of, next slide please, of the applicant. This is again just to have you the kind of visual impression of location of the site relative to seismicity around. And again, Dominion presented this very clearly. Basically, it's about 400 kilometers away from Charleston zone. It is about 800 kilometers from Wabash zone and 970 kilometers from the closest point of New Madrid. New Madrid is not shown here because it's beyond. But all these zones, of course, were included in seismic hazard analysis. Next slide, please. Again, I don't want to spend much time. It was heavily discussed before. What is going on? These two plots demonstrate what contributes the most to the seismic hazard. As you can see for low frequencies, and I'm only showing here 10-4, the contribution, the main contribution, of course, is from closest faults, closest seismic sources, and there is a contribution of together Charleston and New Madrid. Okay, that's all. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we did confirmatory analysis, and on our part, we did calculations of seismic hazard. And at this figure, we are showing comparison of seismic hazard, rock hazard, calculated by Dominion and by NRC staff. As you can see, Dominion is shown in thick lines, and NRC's confirmatory analysis in dash lines. They are pretty close. And considering all we do in seismology, it's pretty good similarity. Next slide, please. About testing. Applicant conducted additional geophysical testing, and this additional geophysical testing resulted in more complex characterization of subsurface, and specifically it's not flat layering under the site. It's kind of undulating erosional contacts. Now, we had a lot of REIs, a lot of discussions on this, but just to make it clear, what is happening, this is same type of lithological formations. It's called saprolite. And the difference between different different layers is basically gradient, not dramatic jump of shear wave velocity, and it's kind of different weathering and it's gradient change of shear wave velocity. But we reviewed this and we reviewed seismic analysis that Dominion performed. And of course, we looked carefully at seismic data, suspension logging data measured in different borings. Next slide, please. Next slide corresponds to another type part of our confirmatory analysis. As I mentioned before, we confirmed we got very similar results for rock hazard. And again, Dominion explained this. If you want, I can come back to this, but rock hazard is very similar between us and what Dominion got. Next step is to calculate site response or final GMRS. And final GMRS on the left side, you can see shear wave velocity profiles for different locations. And based on this shear wave velocity profile, we calculated amplification factor from hard rock to the surface, to certain locations, certain elevation. In this case, GMRS, which is 224 feet. On the right side, you can see a comparison of site amplification function calculated by us, blue line, opposite, red line, and blue line is Dominion. There are some differences because we use different methods, but in general it's very similar and its results are consistent because Dominion does more randomization that we do. This is why their site amplification function is more smooth. We have more pronounced frequency amplification at some point. Now, below this is a comparison of the last step calculation of GMRS. Our GMRS came lower generally than Dominion, and there is a reason for this. We use different method, approach 3, and we use slightly different averaging of profiles. But since, and also another difference comes from how you do interpolation at high frequencies, because as you probably remember, we only have for hard rock 25 Hertz and 100 Hertz. And basically between 25 Hertz and 100 Hertz, it is partially dominated by the way interpolation is done.
So you want to be on the next slide?
Yes. And next slide, please. Next slide is basically the main results. As you can see, with red line is ESBWR. It's not showing here. CSDRS. Blue line is original ESP GMRS, and black line is the final GMRS for COLA. We are showing this just to see to demonstrate the difference, and again, just to remind you, the difference is different elevation and different subsurface characterization. Yes,
but you show no exceedance, and the applicants showed some exceedance of it.
It is not correct. If you look carefully between a red line, which is CSDRS, and black line, which is most recent GMRS, there is a difference. It's about within 10%, and it's high at high frequencies. But this is for GMRS. It's not for other locations. But for other elevations and other locations, it's different.
I understand. But you show exceedance above 50 hertz or so. I think the applicant was showing exceedances around 9 to 10 hertz, I believe.
It is for different locations. It's for foundation input response spectra. And there are different, the applicant mentioned this. There is location at 224 elevation, which is same for foundation input response spectra for reactor building.
Yeah.
Next is, I believe, 240 something elevation, and this is for control building. And another elevation, of course, is PBSRS, which is 290 foot, and it's much higher. Higher elevation and higher amplification. And again, just to remind you, I'm now talking about GMRS, which is kind of, if I may say, the end of the story for 252. I'm not saying it's the end of the story, but it's the end of the story for this section. Yes. Can I go to conclusions, or you want to?
Well, I think you know what my question is going to be, right? Because you already prepared a backup slide.
Okay, that's true.
If I did the response spectra for the mineral earthquake and plotted it on this plot.
Yes, you are talking about slide 76. Sorry, it's the last slide. Yes. On this slide, you kind of preceded this with your question before. You can see with three different colors, three components of response spectra calculated using the records that you saw before. And it is compared to CSGRS, red line, and with GMRS. And as you can see, it exceeds GMRS. But again, please be careful, because in a way we are comparing apples and oranges, because this is an actual record which happened to be at the site. What we do with GMRS, it's a probabilistic approach. Now, the important part, according to GDC, General Design Criteria, we have to be concerned about maximum event, and we are concerned. As you can see, CSGRS, or basically everything is designed for CSGRS at the site, is much higher. This is why there is no concern on our part from the safety point.
Absolutely, there's no concern at all for North Anna 3, but it just, I guess, it doesn't give me a lot of confidence in all this new CS methodology and the new, ground motion model, and we apply it, and we don't predict we don't found the earthquake that actually occurred.
Okay. Again, since you asked this,
it's a generic question. Again, for the record, it has absolutely nothing to do with the North Anna 3 COLA.
The generic answer is even I said it's apples and oranges. It's even more than apples and oranges. It's even more different, because this record was obtained on a base mat. Now, we did actually we published a paper with NRC staff. We actually evaluated the record on the base mat at the bottom, basically, of construction and at the elevation. And what we found out that low frequencies are also affected by structural motion. What is happening when you have an earthquake, the whole structure starts moving. And there is a kind of resonance at low frequencies. This is why if it would be a clean record on ground like it should be, it may be lower at low frequencies frequencies also.
Somebody could do that analysis, couldn't they?
We did very rough analysis, and rough analysis doesn't conclude this really absolutely. But clearly, what we concluded is that it is influenced by structure motion at low frequencies, where you see exceedance. Now, how much, I cannot tell you, unfortunately. Okay, we didn't do this.
Instrumentation that measure that blue line in there, the one that was in North Anna, does it have a degradation at high energies, high frequencies? I mean, I'm more worried, Pete is worried the fact that the blue line is above the black line. I'm more worried that it doesn't even follow the shape. That you completely miss the prediction is that you're going to have, 5 times more energy at 20 hertz, and you didn't.
Okay.
That's a really bad prediction.
Okay, let me...
And the first thing I'm asking, is the instrumentation good at 20 hertz, or does it lose sensitivity?
Instrumentation may be good. The problem is that when you have, again, record on the base mat, it's not a free field. It is well known that it's filtering out high frequencies. What this means that actually, if it would be recorded on a free field, it's absolutely clear that the high frequency part will be elevated. How much, I cannot say. But there is a lot of measurements done in Los Angeles. And what I did in my previous life, we compared real free field with ground motion in the basement at the different elevations. And it's always like that. High frequency is degraded or diminished. Now, sometimes even 50%. This is why, but it depends upon structure, depends upon many things. This is why kind of, again, as I said, we have to be careful because this was not a free field record. And all these comparisons should be done with free field records.
Were there any instruments around the mineral earthquake that weren't at the plant? Like between the plant and the...
Yes, 50 kilometers away.
Pardon me?
50 kilometers away.
50 kilometers.
Okay, it's a very difficult problem for seismology because basically in our science we only have money to install instrumentation in the areas where earthquake happens.
Yeah, like around it.
California has special provisions for this, special funding. This is different. All other country part is not having this law. California has a law that every new building pays certain fee to put strong motion instrumentation. And this is why there are gazillions of instruments in California. And there is not many instruments in Central Eastern United States. I'm too much. Okay.
Yeah, I think you convinced me that there is no way you can move the whole plant at 20 hertz.
No.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. If you look at this as a filter, it's kind of...
Quick while you're ahead.
Okay.
You were right. I was wrong.
But it's the low frequencies that do most of the structural damage.
There's no way you can move it.
Yeah.
Yes, but this is a very good point. I did mention this. Just to finish. Okay. The applicant basically we concluded that the applicant did good job and we didn't find any